So you got a space like that in there, okay? Now, when we have pages divided up into columns, we've got pages divided up into columns. The standard width between the columns is a pica, okay? That's just standard. Sometimes they're different, but that's typically real. So let's say I divided this page up into columns here. Got a page where the columns are equal to each other. This little gap in here, that's the gutter. That's the term for that. And it's 1 pica. That's how wide that is. Okay. Now, sometimes the columns are not symmetrical from one side to the other. You could have like 3 columns over here and 2 over here, or you could have something that breaks the column structure because of a photo, you know, something like that. So you might have like over here. Very steady this morning. Either not enough or too much coffee. I got a big one over here and a narrow one over there. Okay, so maybe we have a photo that's going to be in something like this. So I'm going to make a box that's going to represent the idea where there's a photo. Now, let's say the photo comes like this. It's going to go across here. The edge of the photo goes to the edge of the gutter. The photo would not cover up the gutter because you need that gutter for over here. There's going to be some type. But then I'm exaggerating this. The edge of the photo, in order to print off the edge of the magazine, has to hang over the edge of where the trim size is, right? And this idea is called a what? What's it called? A bleed. It's called a bleed when there's an overhang to the cut area, okay? And the usual bleed amount is 9 points, which is the same thing as 1/8 of an inch. Sometimes it's a little less, sometimes they need more, but a typical bleed amount is 9 points or 1/8 of an inch going over the edge, okay? So if I have something over here that bleeds, like down here in the bottom, I'll put another picture. The edge of the bleed part is running into where the crop marks are, but the crop marks are long enough that you can still see the crop marks past where the bleed is, so you can see where it's supposed to cut. Okay? Now, let's say that this is something that's being printed on larger sheets of paper, because it has to be if we're going to have these marks on it, right? You can't print it on paper that's not big enough for the marks to print on it too, right? So the paper is bigger, and let's say the edge of the paper is out here. This is getting to be kind of ugly and busy, but that's okay. It's not actually an accident. You know, if I were doing this in Illustrator, I could turn the layers on and off. But the problem with that is it makes you think you only have to think about one thing at a time, whereas in fact you have to think about all of these things at the same time when you're planning, you know? So I'm printing this on a bigger sheet of paper, right? The size of the sheet of paper that I'm printing it on is, logically enough, the sheet size. The sheet size is the dimensions of how big the piece of paper is that's going into the printing machine or the printing unit. Okay? Sheet-fed printing is printing where the paper goes in already cut down into some sort of sheet size. Okay? That's called sheet-fed. Okay, now, why was I stressing to you that we needed to get everything centered both ways when we put our design on our sheet for making the booklets?
When you cut them.
What about when you cut them? That's right, but what about when you cut it? To make it even how?
So, it's easier to measure. You only have to measure once.
Okay, so that's right. That's part of it. Yep, that's definitely right. Okay, what else? About the printing part of it. If you don't get the stuff in the center, then what? Huh?
And it's going to be all over the place.
Well, you cut part of the page off. You got to be sure that when you print two-sided, you have made a setup that is the easiest to be sure that it lines up accurately, right? And if your paper goes through the machine in a reasonably calibrated manner, it's going to come out basically, the image is going to come out basically on the middle of the sheet if you tell it to. And then when it turns over, if the machine works like it's supposed to and is not too far off, the image on the other side is going to match up pretty well too. Okay? Now that could be off a little. 3-4 points is not uncommon. Okay? Especially on a machine like that, which costs $30,000 and is cheap for a printer. $30,000 for a really good printer is cheap. Okay? So, we can't quite calibrate it very well, and it goes out of calibration for where the second side prints a lot, But a couple 3 points is not enough to be more than this bleed margin problem. We want to make sure we have plenty of bleed so that if it gets off a little bit. And then, like you said, when it's time to cut, remember how we had our pages like this, and they were folded in half, so they were kind of like that. This is the edge of our paper, and it goes like that. And then we had our image inside of here, and then we had little marks here where it was time to cut. This is not to scale, but it gives you the sense of what was going on. We wanted to be sure the whole thing was in the center, so that when we put it into the cutter, the distance from here to there was equal to the distance from here to there, and then we only had to set the cutter once so we could stick one end and clamp it and cut, turn it around, stick the other end in and clamp it and cut. It was the same cutting distance. That saves production time, right? So if it's in the center, the thing that takes the longest to adjust is the cutter, right? I mean, if you're working on a file on your computer, you can just go select all and hit the arrow key and go knit, 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 and you moved it. It doesn't work like that when it's time to move the machine, So we want to make it the best we can for the machine. Okay, so are there questions about any of this? Anything come up in anybody's head? Not so much? Okay. Typically, the paper that we use is what's called grain long. Paper is grain long. And I'll give you some more info about how paper is made and what that means exactly. But as the paper is being made, this is the direction that all the fibers are going as the paper is being made, and all the fibers in the paper are parallel to the longer direction. It folds more easily the long way. That's why you printed the covers the long way on the 1117, so that they would fold more cleanly, as opposed to across the grain, which breaks the fibers and makes a more yucky fold. Okay? That's why we did that. So I think I have everything. Let me just look here. I got live area. I got registration marks. There is also some, no, I don't actually. I have trim marks. There are also these little bullseye things that you can turn on in the crop mark filter that sometimes are used and sometimes aren't. And they're called registration marks, and we'll see what those do. The little bullseye things that print in the corner are used to help line up the colors when something is actually printed on a printing press with real ink, where the paper is moving and we have to get them lined up. Okay, so the ones that look like bullseyes are registration marks. The ones in the corners are crop marks or trim marks. Okay, so we got the print margin is the distance that part you can't print on when you're printing on sheets. The design margin is part of the visual layout plan, and it's the designer's open space that's inside of where we're cutting. Okay, I think we got it, all right?